Good evening, gentlefolk. Today I'll be running you through a quick guide to get your first fuel power plant up and running. There are two basic setups depending on if you're going to focus on power production or plastic and rubber production. Generally, I'll start with a focus on power, then transition over to a plastic and rubber build later in the game, as the demand for it increases throughout your production chain. For this guide, I'll be running you through the power-focused build. For this build, you will require the following components for structures: 125 motors, 40 encased steel beam, 60 cables, 60 steel pipes, 40 copper sheets, 30 computers, 60 heavy frames, 300 rubber, and 300 quickwire. If you have them available, 2 power shards would be helpful. They aren't necessary, they just make the build slightly more efficient. You will also need the usual extras for power lines, belts, and piping. In this case, focusing a little bit more on the copper sheets, as we will be using mostly piping from this build. Tech 1 belts will be fine, but for the purposes of this video, I will be building with Tech 3 belts, though they are not necessary. As per usual, I'll be basing my build off a normal grade resource node, so in this case it will be producing 120 cubic meters of crude oil per minute. So we will set up here with this normal grade oil node, plenty of clear space and ready access to water, which isn't necessary for the main power build, but will be useful for processing the byproducts if you're so inclined. Let's just quickly clear out the plant life and throw down some foundations to make it easier to work with. Firstly, throw down your oil extractor on the oil node, pointing it generally in the direction that you want to go. We are working with liquids for this one, so keep in mind that the oil extractor only has 10 meters of head lift. So if you exceed about 2 big foundations in height, you will also need to add pumps onto the pipeline in order to get the liquid up high enough. The crude oil will then need to be split between 2 refineries like so. Set these refineries to the fuel and polymer resin recipe. This is the most efficient way to produce fuel at this point. However, the polymer resin byproduct is useless without further processing. So for the moment, I will just dump it into the awesome sink like so that it doesn't build up down the line to the refineries, stopping their fuel production. Now, to feed this refined fuel into fuel generators, as each refiner produces 40 cubic meters of refined fuel per minute, and the generators only consume 12, we can run around 6.5 generators from the output. So we will throw down the 6 that it can support consistently, so you get constant power supply. Now all that's left is to plug it all in. Just like the coal plant, it will take a bit of power to get it all up and running, as the crude oil needs to be extracted and refined into fuel before it hits the generators. So your extractors and the 2 refineries will need 100 megawatts of power between them to get started. If you have it spare in your grid already, that's fine. Otherwise, 4 biomass generators can be set up to get things started. Once accounting for the 100 megawatt operational power cost, this setup will be bringing in 800 megawatts of power. If you have those 2 power shards available, they can be added to one of the generators to consume the extra 8 cubic meters of fuel that's being produced. If you set your generator up to 194%, bringing the net power production to just shy of 950 megawatts of power. Instead of just dumping your polymer resin, it can be fed back into a refinery and combined with water to make either plastic or rubber. It's not particularly efficient, but it should provide enough materials for your research projects. I hope this guide helps out any of the new players to Satisfactory here. If you have any questions, feel free to drop a comment below and I'll get back to you as soon as I can.